Hello, and welcome to our next session on stress and mental health. Throughout the presentation, you can submit your questions by typing them into the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen. Our presenter will address these following the presentation. I'd like to now introduce our speaker, Emily Hager, to the stage. Emily, please go ahead and turn on your camera and microphone.
Okay, so before I get started into presentations, especially when I'm talking about mental health, I like to share a little bit about myself. My name is Emily Hager. I am from East Tennessee. I'm from Knoxville. I was born and raised in Knoxville, and had a very successful childhood, as I like to put it. I graduated from high school, went to East Tennessee State University in Johnson City, and that's where I got my bachelor's in biology/biochemistry. After that, I joined the military, and I served in the United States Navy for 4 years. During that time, I got married, had my first son. And I like to share all this just to give a little bit of background on why I do what I do. During the time that I was in high school, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And as a high schooler, witnessing your mom having to go through these types of illnesses is very difficult. And after I graduated from college and I went into the military, I got a phone call that her cancer had come back. And it was breast cancer, and this cancer had metastasized to her brain. So I was at a point in my military career where I could either choose to stay in or I could separate. And me and my previous husband decided to move back to Knoxville. So we both separated from the military and moved back to Knoxville, Tennessee to help my dad take care of my mom. During this point, I was in my early to mid 20s. And my mom had a very large tumor on her sciatic nerve, and it rendered her just incapable of moving. She was immobile. My dad was having to lift her. And needless to say, it's a very trying and difficult thing to witness and to be a part of as when you're in your 20s, especially with your mother or your father. And after my mom passed, that's when I went back to University of Tennessee and pursued my doctorate in nutrition. And that's kind of why I'm here talking to you guys today, just from the connections and the relationships that I had when I was at UT. But I like to, when I was kind of thinking about this presentation, I was really thinking about myself. And, when I was going through graduate school and pursuing my doctorate after losing my mom, during that time that, my mom had just recently passed, my grandmother got very sick as well. It was my mom's mom, and she just kind of gave up. So within that year, my grandmother passed. And while I was also at UT, my previous husband took his life and died by suicide. So this obviously was a very trying and difficult time period for me. And I was a graduate student and now a single mother of a son that's 2 years old. So it was a very trying time for me. And I like to, when I'm having conversations, especially about college students, I like to kind of broaden our scope a little bit and start thinking about what are these students potentially going through, and how can we support them in their mental health and in their well-being, to help them succeed for what their pursuit is, regardless of the field. Because we all know that if your mental health or if you are experiencing something very traumatic, it's difficult to be successful. It's hard for your mind to even function that well. So after I, after my husband died by suicide, I had a lot of different experiences in my life. I had, a spiritual experience in my life. I joined some nonprofit organizations that are really focused on being able to provide for people in the community. And one in particular that I joined is called Vet to Vet Tennessee, and they were doing suicide prevention for veterans. And that was on one side, it was very difficult for me to face, but on the other side, it gave me that community of people that knew what I was going through, and they knew what I needed without even having to say anything. They just kind of knew. So that, I really started in the field with that organization. I did continue on to graduate with my doctorate, and I joined Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network to do suicide prevention across the state of Tennessee, and we get to do some really amazing things, not only in my region, but I have the honor of doing veteran suicide prevention across the state, veteran and military. And I get to service a variety of different populations too, from youth. I go and I talk to grade schools all the way up to the elderly population, where I'm, working with assisted living homes and staff, and or working with peers. It's a really wonderful job, but that's why I enjoy and appreciate being asked to talk about mental health and mental well-being. My focus is suicide prevention. So there are a variety of different things that are kind of encapsulated in mental health. My focus is suicide prevention. I won't go into a lot of suicide prevention things. I'm really just going to kind of hit the surface. But you'll probably notice through the slides that there's some data that's more focused on suicide than other mental health areas. I do also, though, want to say that suicide is a very it is a very prevalent issue that we have amongst college students and young adults. I'm out in universities in our region and work across the state with a bunch of different universities to do suicide prevention for college students and our young adults. So even though it's not this breakout isn't specifically for suicide, I do focus a little bit on that. You'll see that in the data. So before I start talking really specifically about mental health, I like to pose this question to attendees or participants. What does health mean to you? And when I ask this question, it's kind of difficult in a virtual setting, but when I ask this question in an in-person setting, I can get a variety of answers. Typically, though, most of the answers will fall within the physical health category. Not many people, we have gotten better, and some individuals will say things like self-care, which can fall into a mental health category. So the primary one that I hear is physical health, and often sometimes I'll hear mental health, but I always charge people to really understand and think about how we can work and look at the variety of dimensions of health that exist. There are multiple dimensions of health. If you Google it, you can find anything from 5 to 28 or 32. But when we're talking about health, we're looking at someone's full life, not just their physical health, not just their mental health, but it can also be their spiritual health. It can be their financial health. It can be their intellectual health. We know that it can be their social health. We know that that has been impacted recently. So there are a variety of different things that, impact us as individuals, and they're all interconnected. So it really hinders us if we look at them in silos. And you can see this when you get into the medical world. Like, there's a lot of institutions that are moving more to integrative health, because there is such a connection between these different dimensions. And when I'm talking to like grade schoolers to help them understand the importance of really taking action when we see someone struggling in a different dimension of health, I will always give them the example of this. If we have a football team and they're in a big game and one of the players breaks an ankle, what do? Most times we send someone out, right? Like the game will stop. Everyone will be super quiet, and that individual, that player, will get help. But nowadays, what do we do oftentimes when we see someone crying or sad or visibly distraught? If you see someone on the curb that's distraught, most times people don't do anything. We've gotten into such a culture of avoidance. Most people will just lift up their cell phones and go the other direction and pretend like they didn't see anything. Or I like to give the example of the fender bender, right? Back in the day, it used to be when you got in a fender bender, people would stop and they would ask you if you need help, or they would help you move your car out in the middle of the road. Or, nowadays people don't do that. They just drive around most times. Unless you're in a rural community. I do find that rural communities tend to be a little bit more open and more interactive. But most people, they drive around it, and they might look at it and say, oh, that sucks. And then they drive around. We've entered into this space where we're in an avoidance culture. And I really charge you to take action. Don't avoid. Take action, even with students, with college students, undergraduate, graduate. If you're a faculty member, engage with the faculty, engage with your peers, engage with the administrators, because a lot of times we need it, and it affects us a lot. Before I get into the data, just to make a point on how necessary it is to talk about these things, I always ask people to really evaluate their own personal attitudes, opinions, and oftentimes experiences before we get too far into anything. And you'll notice when looking at this, these are very specific to suicide. But it doesn't have to be. It can be any other area of mental health as well. But oftentimes when it comes to mental health, there's a stigma. There's a stigma with suicide, for sure. That's why people don't say anything and oftentimes don't get help. And a lot of that stigma is propagated when we have attitudes and opinions. We as a community or a community member have attitudes and opinions about people that are struggling with depression or struggling with suicide. And when you read these different attitudes and opinions, oftentimes there's this really interesting training. It's called ASSIST. It's applied intervention, suicide intervention skills training. And a part of that, it's a very long training, but a part of that is they take these attitudes and opinions and they ask the participants to mark on a scale where they fall with these attitudes and opinions. And what's so interesting is in a class of 20 people, you can see that with some of these, you can span the spectrum with beliefs. And that's just 20 people. Imagine us as an entire community. So the only purpose in going through this is for you to, one, self-reflect. I give the example of this when after my husband died by suicide, there were so many people that told me that's the most selfish thing that someone could do, is to die by suicide, especially when they have a family. And nowadays, I'm having conversations with people that are having suicidal thoughts. And that conversation is really not going to go that well if in the back of my mind, I'm thinking that's the most selfish thing that you could do. So we have to take a minute and we have to think about what are our own attitudes, opinions, and experiences, and how can we remain respectful and non-judgmental towards people that might be struggling. As community members, we have to figure out how we can remain neutral, especially if you are, maybe you're a graduate student, maybe you're a GTA, maybe you're a professor, whatever your role is, maybe you're a researcher and you run a lab, whatever your role is, you have a sphere of influence. You have people that are looking up to you. Even if you're a student, you have people looking up to you. You have peers, you have family members. There are people looking up to you. And we have to figure out how we can remain respectful and non-judgmental, how we can take those attitudes, opinions, and experiences and be able to reflect on them ourselves and come to a place to where we are not being judgmental to the student that's struggling. There's a common myth that says, with this one's particularly with suicide, but there's a common myth that says, that says like those that are talking about suicide won't actually do it. And a lot of times I'll rephrase that as, oh, well, they're just seeking attention. And I see this thought process very commonly with college students, especially with like the professor or the GTA to student perspective. There's a lot of times where you might see that student that maybe they're struggling to turn in their homework or do their assignments. Maybe they're struggling to stay awake in class. But I do always charge people to think, why? Why is that student struggling? Were they out? Sometimes I'll hear, oh, well, they're just out drinking all night. But why? Why do they feel like that's a need? Oftentimes you can find that deep down in there, once you get past all those surface level issues, deep down in there, there's something within their heart that is hurt. There is a pain in there. And once that person can start to get the assistance that they need, it really does make a difference. So I do always charge people to think about, what are your attitudes and opinions towards the people that you are around or your sphere of influence? And, how can you remain respectful and non-judgmental when either, interacting with them or even if you're having a conversation. So these are just some data points that really focus on, again, it's more specific towards suicide, but it does make a good point. About 46,000 people died by suicide in 2020 in our nation. These are adults, 18 years and older. It was the 12th leading cause of death. A lot of people don't realize that. And I like to draw attention to that bottom item. About 1.1 million suicide attempts per year. That's a lot of people that are struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. This slide is really pointing out the difference, and you can see it in the graphic. All this data comes from the CDC as well, but you can see it when looking at the slide or the graph. There's a stark difference between males and females. Males, the main thing I want you to take from this slide is males are 4 times more likely to die by suicide, but females are more likely to attempt suicide, and typically that comes down to lethal means. This graphic, I prefer the iceberg effect just because I feel like that's what I grew up with, and it makes more sense to me. But so those 46,000, again, this is adults 18 and older, about 46,000 dying by suicide. That's the tip of the iceberg, right? That's what's above the water. That's what we can see. That's the data point that is oftentimes in the publications and what a lot of people are looking at. But underneath the water, we have this massive iceberg, all the way up to 12.2 million adults that had serious thoughts of suicide. That's a lot of people in our country, and that's 1 year, 12.2 million adults. This one is focused more on youth, which they haven't had this level of data since they had it in 2020, but they didn't have this much information in previous years. But age 12 to 17, 3 million youth in our country had serious thoughts of suicide. And so this is a very solid information to show you that, our youth and our young adults are struggling. They are having thoughts of suicide. And I always talk about, and you'll see this a little bit here. When I'm talking about youth and young adults, I always talk about adverse childhood experiences. And those are, experiences that youth can have, or any of us as an adult. There's actually a survey. It was a research study that was done out of California years ago now. But they identified different traumatic events and experiences that can happen in a person's life during childhood. And it includes witnessing maternal abuse, witnessing drug use, abandonment, neglect, different, witnessing violence. They've added, recently they added witnessing community violence. So if you're in a neighborhood where there's a lot of violence and you witness it, that is also an adverse childhood experience. But they have this survey out there that you can take, and what they've identified is that these adverse childhood experiences, the more of them that you have, the higher risk you are for cardiovascular disease, the higher risk you are for diabetes and suicide. So I always like to kind of share that information so that people can look into it and learn more about adverse childhood experiences. But also so that we can recognize that, our youth can be experiencing these traumatic events in their life. And a lot of them are. I talk to high school students on a regular basis. And a lot of them live in broken homes. They live in very tumultuous environments. And, they have the perception of abandonment or neglect. So, a lot of them are struggling, and this can, as these experiences increase, it will affect them through the lifespan. So if there's something that we can do, maybe it's at the youth level, maybe it's at the young adult level, in college, in colleges, you have young adults as a captive audience. They're coming to your class. I say that with high schools as well all the time. You have a captive audience. They are there 5 days out of the week. You have the ability to really make a difference in this person's life if you can invest into it. Same thing with college students. You can see right there, the third one down, suicide is the third leading cause of death for youth and young adults. Third leading cause of death. So there's a lot that we can do as members of this society that have direct interaction with our young adults to be able to support them and invest in them, and to, maybe it is helping them identify some of the things that they have experienced, and helping them get connected into a support network. That's some of the things that we can do. I love this information because I feel like oftentimes it's not shared as much. But only half of all Americans experiencing major depression received treatment. And this data comes from 2020, so you also have to keep in mind that, during that time period, it was really hard to get treatment of any kind. But in the state of Tennessee, particularly for mental health, people could be on a waiting list for months. And it's still very long here. There's a long wait period to be able to receive treatment. So that might be part of that first one. But the main thing that I like to focus on with this slide is 80 to 90% of those people that sought treatment, and this is looking at depression, that sought treatment for depression and were treated successfully. They were treated successfully using therapy and or medication. People need to hear this. They need to know that you can overcome suicidality and you can overcome depression. It doesn't have to be a lifelong diagnosis that you live with for the rest of your life. It doesn't have to be that. You can overcome it. And people really need to hear that, especially our young people. A lot of times our youth and our young adults, in their mind, they think, this is how my life is going to be for the rest of the time that I'm here. I can't do this. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to be here. I can't deal with this. So they need to know that it can be successfully overcome. And this particularly is looking at therapy and medication. But I always charge people to think more broadly than that as well. Therapy, and I'll get to this in one of the future slides, but counseling and therapy is a part of the protective factors, but it's not the entirety of the protective factors. So it's people need to hear that this can be successfully overcome. And look at that bottom one. Depression affects 20 to 25% of Americans 18 and older per year. So we do have a lot of work to do. And I do always encourage everyone that I'm talking to that you have a role. You do not have to be a licensed counselor to make a difference in a person's life. I had a Vietnam veteran that was struggling with suicide, and he was telling people, everybody that he came into contact with, he was a homeless veteran, and he couldn't get an appointment for 2 weeks. And all I had to do was call him, have a conversation, try to get him help, and check in with him. I checked in with him every day until he was able to get help. And I would just say, hey, I'm thinking about you. I care about you. I'm reaching out to some people today. I got a lot of no's in the process. I called a lot of people, and there just wasn't, as it said, it was hard to get treatment. But I found an organization that was willing to pay for him to get a bus ticket to Colorado to go to the VA in Colorado because they could get him in the next night. And it was really incredible. And that was a year and a half ago. And this man texts me about once every month just to check in with me, and has said to me multiple times that he wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for someone just caring. And, he still had his ups and downs. It's not always a cupcakes and rainbows types of situation, but I'll tell you what, he's alive, and he's trying to make a difference. So that's, it's just an example of how, us sewing into people, as big or small as we can, really does make a difference. These are some different warning signs. I think I have a couple of slides in here on warning signs, so I'm not going to go through all of this, but this is just things to keep an eye out for, especially if you're a professor or a lecturer and you have students that you are interacting with on a regular basis. These are some different things that you can keep an eye on. So one, if you notice, just some things that I like to point out, particularly for youth and young adults. One is if you notice that they're withdrawing from friends or social activities. Maybe you have a student that, they were a part of this friend group in your class and now they're not. Now they're not coming over there and talking to them, or that doesn't mean that just because you see that you directly go and have a conversation with them. But if you start to notice a few of these things adding together, maybe they're not sitting with their friends or engaging in social activities, and you see that they lost an interest in their personal appearance, and maybe they're not able to stay awake, and maybe they're not turning in their schoolwork like they had been before. Or maybe they experienced a recent severe loss, or have a fear of failure, or have experienced a major failure. These are all different things that you can kind of keep in the back of your mind when you're paying attention to people in your classes. I'll tell you, this happened to me when I was at UT and I experienced my loss. The department head and a couple of the faculty members knew, what had happened. I actually was on campus when it happened. But they knew, one, that I experienced that severe loss. They also noticed, the changes in the personal appearance. They noticed the, use of substances, and they started helping. They got me connected into counseling services. I attribute a lot of my ability to even be alive today to the faculty members at the University of Tennessee, because they really did go the extra mile in helping me get connected to services and get help. And it really does save lives. Here are other risk factors. Financial and work stress is a big one with students. I will say homelessness is also a big one with students that oftentimes can be overlooked. I do think that we've made there's a bunch of universities have made a good progress in at least eliminating or working on eliminating the stigma of homelessness on campus, but it is very real. Food insecurity is very real on campuses, and these are all risk factors. It goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If we don't have that fundamental hierarchy, or if we don't have that fundamental level, how are we supposed to be expected to meet all of these other upper levels, right? Like, we have to make sure that our students, have access to home, to shelter, to food, have access to healthcare. Campuses are usually pretty good about this. They're usually pretty good about, supporting their students with health. But maybe it's a family member or something like that, and they need more assistance. So these are all risk factors that I encourage you to take a look at. These are more specific to I like to call them higher achieving professionals. I'll tell you, in my region in Tennessee, we have had a lot of suicide deaths of physicians, those with their doctorate, graduate students. And so I do like to always take a second and just say, reach out to your peers. If you're a faculty member, or you're a professor or a lecturer or a graduate student, I know as a graduate student that all of my peers struggled with depression and some with suicide whilst I was there. So, we are not untouchable. These thoughts and, these issues do affect us as faculty members, and as higher achieving professionals as well. And these are just additional risk factors to, kind of what we experience. There's job stress, lack of sleep. There tends to be a heavier workload. A lot of times higher achieving professionals have a greater access to lethal means and a greater knowledge of chemicals and lethal drugs. There's institutional stigma on top of self-stigma. So a lot of people will have self-stigma, which is kind of like the, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or, my life is too good, I can't have these feelings, those types of thoughts. But there's also an institutional stigma that tends to happen when someone has reached a level of success. And, you can hear it all the time with doctors. They'll say things like I can't struggle with these thoughts. People come to me with their problems. I can't have problems, so you can hear those types of comments pretty regularly. And that's stigma. There are a lot of people that struggle with depression and suicidal thoughts. So the more we can kind of get away from that, hopefully the more people we have that would be willing to communicate that they're struggling. There's also a fear of repercussions for a lot of higher achieving professionals. How is this going to affect my image? What are people going to say? Is there going to be disciplinary action? Oftentimes that happens a lot with law enforcement. They're afraid that which there's a reason that they're afraid of it, because it does happen. They're afraid that their badge and their firearm will be taken from them. So it's there is a lot of stigma when we're talking about these types of things. So this is really important for a variety of different people, but I really like to focus on it with college students and high school. There are some high school students that are overly committed to a variety of different things, and they experience this, and that's when we get the situation where it's like the star basketball player or the valedictorian that dies, and I never saw it coming. That's where those statements come from. And it could be feelings of burnout, but I just encourage you, if you are at that point, if you are, feeling decreased personal achievement, or if you're, feeling depression or reduced cognitive functioning, like if you've reached that point of burnout, one thing that I have had to learn, and we all have to learn, is one, to recognize when we're at this place of burnout, because we all get there, all of us. Honestly, if you have any role in the university, Even as a student, you are going to reach the point of burnout. That's just, we all do it. So step one is recognizing it. And then step two, the most important, is being able to do something to bring yourself out of that place. Figure out what works for you. Self-care is not, I love this. One of my mentors, I'm an early riser, and she is too. And she responded to my email at like 4:00 in the morning. And I was so excited that somebody else is emailing at 4:00 in the morning. And I love what she said. She said, self-care doesn't look the same for everyone. So I really encourage you to think about, what is it for you that works for you to get to that place of rest, and to give yourself some grace. I'm not going to go through these paths of suicide, although this is my favorite slide, and I love it. We're not focused so much on suicide. But if at any point you guys would like for me to come and do a conversation and do a talk about suicide prevention, I'd be happy to. Or if you have questions and you guys want to talk about this during the question piece, I'd be happy to do it. But I'm going to skip through this part right here. I wanted to get to the protective factors, particularly this wall, because this is where we make a difference in the community. You can see kind of what I was referring to, the counselors and therapists right there. That's that one brick of the wall. But there's so much more that can be done in a community to provide protection to an individual. And I encourage you to think about your environment. Maybe it is your university, or maybe you work in another field, but I encourage you to think about your environment and what are the different protective factors that you guys can bolster in your area. When I'm talking to colleges and sometimes high schools, but oftentimes with colleges, I encourage people to think about, what are the extracurricular activities? What does this student love? What are they passionate about? And can they get connected to something that they're passionate about that's on campus? Do they have needs? Campuses are usually pretty good about providing resources to students. Do they have needs? What's their friend group? Do they need a friend group? Do they need to get connected to someone else? A lot of times within a department, you can have maybe a student organization, or you can have a student association within the department that at least can be a starting point or a launching place for that person to start to build connection relationships. I will tell you, for the first year to 2 years for college students, a lot of times that's the difficult time period. And this is common with any of these transition stages throughout our life. I'm just making that point because we're kind of talking about students, but and campuses. But I work a lot with military and veterans, and that transition period from military to veteran is one of those difficult time periods. Even for retirement, I know a lot of individuals that transitioning from working to retirement. That's one of those time periods that can be difficult for people. It's a transition period. So I always encourage people, to pay particular attention if you know that someone is going through some of those transition periods. And universities are usually pretty good about offering. I know for a lot of students, having a personal invitation makes a big difference for them. So if that's you and you're in a department, then step out and make a personal invitation for this student to join whatever, or ask one of the other students in the student association if they would reach out to that student and invite them and tell them about it and kind of develop that relationship. This is more just like kind of list of protective factors, really helping students. I do know a lot of our high schools, and obviously my focus is Tennessee. Other states may be different. But in our schools, they've moved pretty far away from teaching high school students coping and problem solving skills. So, if we at the university level can invest into our students to just teach them some basic coping skills, teach them some basic, some basic learning skills. A lot of them don't have that. Nowadays in high schools, they're sitting there on PowerPoints or on the computer. A lot of them don't have note-taking skills. That was never developed. And, for me, that was huge for my success at the college level is because I had developed some of those skills. So I think if we could take time, even if it's, 5-10 minutes in a class once a month, in just teaching them coping skills or problem solving skills, or giving them a time to just, let go of some of the things that might be difficult for them, or some of the things that might be putting pressure on them, so it's kind of something that can be incorporated into their class. And a big one for me that I focus on with college students is the sense of social support and then connectedness. College, especially if you're working with students that maybe they're the first generation student, maybe they've moved away from their hometown that they've never been a part or never been away from before. That connectedness piece can make a huge difference in their lives. And a lot of times that piece is missing. But if they can connect in with a group that they can call home or their family, that can really change people's perspective and make things easier for them. And this is a lot of similar data points as on the previous slides. But I think that incorporating protective factors and really teaching people how to, you can teach resiliency, you can teach coping skills, you can teach these different types of things if done in a way that is received. So very important that we recognize, we do play a role, and our role is being able to provide protective factors to our students. These are just some tips for staying healthy, getting enough sleep, eating well, exercising regularly. We all know that. But, I work, like I said, I got my doctorate in the nutrition department. And this is the example that I give. I'm allowed to, because I was there. I was one of them. But this is the example that I give to people out in the community. Your graduate students in the nutrition department are supposed to be the most educated. They know the most about nutrition. They know about diet. And they know about diseases, and they know how important eating nutritiously is for you. But I'll tell you what, when it comes exam time, they still order in pizza. And it's because you can teach someone until you're blue in the face. But when there's a barrier there and there's trauma, oftentimes we don't do what we're taught unless it's a habit. That's the importance of developing habits. But even I've had times where I got knocked off my, eating nutritiously and exercising regularly. For me, even recently, just job transitions can knock you off of those types of things. So, really focus on getting enough sleep, eating nutritiously, and exercising regularly. Allow yourself to recharge. This is important, and a lot of us don't do it. Learn to say no. But going back to the burnout, recognizing signs of burnout in yourself, and then reaching out for support. That's probably one of the biggest pieces. We don't know what's going on in someone's mind or in someone's life unless they communicate it. And that's why it's so important to be respectful and non-judgmental, because we won't know until someone says something. So if you are in this place, or and you recognize that you need help, reach out for support. And if you work with someone where you might see some warning signs, then please reach out to them as well, and just connect and ask if you can help them. So I think we've got a few minutes for questions.
We do. Thank you, Emily, for that great presentation. Again, anyone, I don't see any questions yet in the Q&A tab, so feel free to drop them in the chat right now or Q&A, and we'll give that just a moment to see if anything comes in. Okay, well, should you have any additional questions, when we close this session, you'll be back into the breakout room. So Emily may be available to stick around or shoot her a message to address anything there. But again, thank you for our presentation today.